The richest religious institution on earth did not gain its power from God. It gained it from money. Behind the gold-covered halls, the priceless art, and the aura of holiness, there is something far more durable than faith: a financial system. The Vatican is not just a spiritual center. It is the longest-lasting economic machine in Western history. And this wealth did not arrive by miracle. It did not descend through prayer. It was built with taxes, with land seizures, with the sale of salvation, with deals made with emperors, kings, and bankers. This is not a story about theology. This is a story about power. And it begins the moment Christianity became legal. In the year 313 AD, the Roman Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan. Christianity, once an underground faith, was suddenly legalized. Overnight, persecution ended, and legitimacy arrived. With legitimacy came gifts. Aristocrats donated land, emperors granted privileges, treasuries opened. Constantine himself funded the construction of the first St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. The message was unmistakable. Holiness and wealth could coexist. And from that moment on, the Church learned what every empire already knew. Money is power, and power needs money to survive. By the early Middle Ages, the Church perfected its first great financial innovation: the tithe. Every believer was required to give 10% of their income to the Church, not voluntarily, as an obligation tied to salvation. A constant river of wealth flowed from peasant fields into parish coffers, upward to bishops, and finally to Rome. Imagine being a medieval farmer, barely feeding your family, still forced to surrender a tenth of your harvest, not to a king, but to God's institution on earth. This was not charity. This was taxation, sanctified by religion. Over centuries, those tithes transformed the Church into Europe's largest landowner. By the year 1000, the Catholic Church is estimated to have owned nearly 1/3 of all land in Western Europe. Not just churches and monasteries, farmland, vineyards, mills, forests, real assets producing real wealth, long before banks or stock markets existed. But land and tithes were not enough. By the 11th century, the Church introduced another financial weapon: indulgences. The idea was devastatingly simple: pay the Church, and the punishment for your sins, or the sins of your dead relatives, would be reduced in the afterlife. Salvation for sale. And it worked. Gold poured into Vatican coffers. Indulgences funded churches. They funded wars. Because by this point, the Church was no longer just a religious authority. It was a geopolitical power. When the Crusades began in 1096, they were framed as holy wars, but they were also massive financial operations. The Church imposed new taxes to fund armies. Those who could not afford to fight were told they could simply pay instead. Cities were conquered. Treasures were seized. Land was claimed, for the faith, but also for Rome. By the end of the Crusades, the Vatican possessed spiritual authority, military influence, and financial power rivaling kings. And here is the contradiction. While priests preached humility and poverty, the Church became Europe's greatest landlord and tax collector. The moral story was for the people. The financial machinery operated behind the curtain. This pattern appears in every empire. By the late Middle Ages, the Vatican had evolved again, from landowner to financier. And by the Renaissance, the popes were no longer just shepherds of souls. They were princes, rulers, and bankers. Which brings us to the moment where wealth finally exposed itself. By the 1500s, the Vatican wanted a monument that would dominate Christianity itself. St. Peter's Basilica. To pay for it, the Church sold indulgences. Fear became currency. Salvation became a transaction. One sentence revealed the system. As soon as a coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. Indulgences funded greatness. They also exposed corruption. In 1517, Martin Luther shattered the illusion. He accused Rome of turning faith into a marketplace. The Reformation split Europe. The Vatican lost its monopoly, but not its instincts. In 1870, the Church lost its lands and armies. Its territorial empire ended, but power does not disappear. It changes form. In 1929, the Lateran Treaty restored the Vatican's wealth: cash, bonds, silence. With that money, the Vatican built its modern weapon, the Vatican Bank. Officially sacred, operationally opaque. Scandals followed. Billions vanished. God's banker died beneath a bridge. The message was clear. The Vatican survived not through miracles, but through finance. From land to indulgences, from indulgences to banks. This is not a story about religion. It is a story about systems. Faith on the surface, money underneath. And history teaches one rule: power never disappears. It only hides. If this story gave you a chance to see things from a different perspective, subscribe to the channel. History doesn't just tell us about the past. It also shows us what we cannot afford to ignore.